Welcome, everyone. I'm Cheryl Hard. I'm president of Corfa, and I'm happy to welcome you today to our webinar on the Marine National Monuments of the Pacific. Um, if you will, please put your name and the refuge that you're affiliated with in the chat so we know who is here today. And also, there will be time for questions and answers at the end, and you can put those in the chat as well. And Barry and Susan will be happy to answer your questions after their presentation. And with that, I'll turn it over to Tom Worthington.
Yeah, good afternoon, everybody. I'm Tom Worthington. I'm with Corfa, and I'm also president of the Minnesota Valley Refuge Friends Group. Welcome to our February webinar. This month, we're heading out to sea, where it's always warm and full of adventure. We're going to learn about the marine national monuments of the National Wildlife Refuge System. And our guides for these vast, remote, and precious ocean ecosystems are Susan White and Barry Christensen. Both Susan and Barry retired from the Fish and Wildlife Service after long and adventurous careers working for the refuge system. Susan White's career with refuges took her from the Florida Keys and Ding Darling Refuge to Hawaii with stops in Washington, D.C. and the Detroit River International Wildlife Refuge. When she retired, Susan was the Deputy Area Supervisor overseeing the Pacific Island refuges and the Marine National Monuments. My good friend Barry is joining Susan. Barry's career included a stint with the Peace Corps in Upper Volta, West Africa. He spent time with the Smithsonian Institution in Washington, D.C., and then he zigzagged across the country from Wyoming to Massachusetts to New York, Iowa, and Minnesota. But he always describes the pinnacle of his career as his time spent as manager of the Midway Atoll National Wildlife Refuge from 2005 to 2008. We're very fortunate to have them join us today and guide us to the oceans. As Cheryl mentioned, type in any questions you may have in the chat box. I will mention that both Barry and Susan have sometimes tenuous internet connections. So if they freeze up at any time, we'll just be patient and we'll get back on track. So that being said, Susan, I'm going to let you take it away.
Hi, can you hear me?
Can.
Great. Thanks so much, Tom. And as you were talking and the whole introduction was going on, I dropped off and came back on and dropped off and came back on. So my internet connection is tenuous and I apologize. I turned off my video. So hopefully that doesn't make me drop. But if the audio starts waffling, let me know and we can switch it up and Eden can do the video. So thank you for that.
Sounds
Thank
good.
you.
Eden, you'll share your screen then. You're going to do the PowerPoint.
I'll keep going and unless it drops. Is that okay?
That works.
Good.
I'll be ready.
All right. Thanks, Eden. And thank you, Tom, and thanks everyone for having us and for this opportunity to share the stories about the Marine National Monuments. As Tom said, I am Susan White, and I've spent most of my career focused on marine protected areas. And I was lucky enough to be part of the Fish and Wildlife Service during some of the most important marine conservation steps in the United States and frankly around the world. And I'm so grateful to be joined by Barry. He's always been a steady rudder of smart refuge management across the country, and especially in the early days of the Marine National Monument. I don't know what we would have done without him. So without further ado, excuse me. I'll start out with a bit of a disclaimer. If you know me, you know that this is going to be really hard for me to do in 30 to 40 minutes because there are so many things that we could talk about, and I can prattle on if you let me, but I'm going to try to do them justice in a short period of time and caveat this that we'll have some further conversation and question and answer period at the end. Things that we'll cover is a basic introduction about what are the Marine National Monuments, where are they, how are they managed as a part of the refuge system, the importance of these protected areas, and then some wonderful conservation success stories followed up by a Q&A. Okay, so let's take a breath, everybody. You know, it's been a week already, and then a second breath. And remember that second breath comes from the ocean. More than 50% of the oxygen that we breathe comes from our seas. The seas provide not only the oxygen, but they regulate the Earth's climate. They provide a wide variety of food and food products, as well as medicines and healthcare. Our ocean is a source of billions in recreation and have been the superhighway of transportation for millennia. And of course, the seas are also a source of endless inspiration and intrigue, cultural connection, and powerful connections for all of us between the past, present, and future.
Susan, can
Yeah.
are you think you're not quite sharing your program yet?
Oh my goodness. Okay. I'm so sorry.
That's okay. I think you might have,
Thank
yeah.
you.
Yep, yep.
Everybody's like missing all of the good stuff.
I was taking a third breath.
Thank you. Okay, how's that?
Perfect. Thank you.
Good. Okay, thank you. So this is the beginning. Then we have things that we're going to cover, what the ocean provides, a wonderful picture of wisdom, the oldest known wild bird, and our breath, right? Yeah. Okay. So here we go. Thank you, Tom. In 2006, U.S. presidents started using their authority under the Antiquities Act to establish national monuments. We have them on land, but in the ocean, they called them marine national monuments. And now, under the Antiquities Act, presidents are authorized to protect objects of antiquity or scientific interest. And in the US, we have 5 marine national monuments. There's 4 in the Pacific. We have Papahanaumokuakea, the Pacific Islands Heritage, Rose Atoll, the Mariana Trench, and then the only one in the Atlantic off the northeast coast of the United States is the Northeast Canyons and Seamounts Marine National Monument. Altogether, these monuments protect nearly 760 million acres of our oceans. That's 756 million in the Pacific and just over 3 million in the Atlantic. That's a big number, right? It's 8 times larger than all of the national parks combined. And I really like this map because it has the monuments superimposed on the continental United States, and it helps to make that scale relatable, just how large these areas are for conservation. It's an enormous milestone in conservation history. And as former director Jim Kurth once said, not since Inilka has the nation made such an important step forward in conservation. Today, we're going to focus on the 4 Pacific monuments. Again, we have Papahanaumokuakea. There'll be a test at the end to make sure everybody can say this wonderful name. Papahanaumokuakea. The Pacific Islands Heritage, Rose Atoll down in American Samoa, and the Mariana Trench over in the Mariana Island archipelago. When the monuments were established, the administration did so to be managed by the Department of the Interior in the Fish and Wildlife Service. And they chose the service for many reasons, but the most notable is that most of the monuments were built to enhance protections that were provided by prior existing national wildlife refuges. The red boxes on this map depict refuges that existed before the monuments were created, and it shows their establishment years. So you see the earliest one here, 1909, the Hawaiian Islands National Wildlife Refuge was established by Teddy Roosevelt. And then after that, we have 1926, Johnston Atoll became a refuge. And then in 1974, Howland Island and Baker Island, Jarvis Island, as well as Rose Atoll were created as national wildlife refuges. In 1988, Midway became an overlay refuge over the naval base. And then 1996, when the military completely pulled out, the full jurisdiction was turned over as a refuge to the Fish and Wildlife Service. And then in 2001, Palmyra Atoll and Kingman Reef were established as refuges. Both Wake and the Mariana Trench refuge units were established after the monuments were created. These refuges, these pre-existing refuges, were at the core of the monuments, but their protections back then were much narrower, right? They were smaller areas. And we all know that wild things need wild places to survive. So just like on land, we know the species in the sea migrate, and that securing habitat along those migratory routes at the scale needed for those species gives them the best opportunities for survival. So that's what the presidents did. Building on this knowledge, in 2006, President George W. Bush established Papahanaumokuakea. This monument was the first, and it came with the understanding that big places need big ideas. This monument set out a new paradigm for conservation management. It has a mandate for co-management. That's co-management, coordinated, cooperative, seamless management across all of the agencies, across all of the monument. And this is believing that we are better and stronger together. So I mentioned that there were two pre-existing refuges in Papahanaumokuakea. There's also a National Battle Memorial. There are two state protected areas, and there are NOAA protected areas. And on top of that, it's a sacred place for the Native Hawaiian culture. So the task was, how do we do all of this together? How do we all work together for the perpetuation and the conservation of this area? The administration set up a unique management structure, a monument management board of 7 entities built on 4 co-trustees. And the co-trustees are the state of Hawaii, the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, represented by both the Refuge System and Ecological Services on the MMB. NOAA, represented by both sanctuaries and the National Marine Fisheries Service, and then the Office of Hawaiian Affairs. The MMB seeks advice from a wonderful Native Hawaiian cultural working group, as well as an intergovernmental coordinated committee. And we have community support organizations that connect with their authorizing agencies, such as the Friends of Midway Atoll, Friends of Hawaiian Islands Refuge, and a Sanctuary Advisory Council. And Papahanaumokuakea is complex. And so I'll explain just a little bit. In addition to the pre-monument designations, there's also the original 2006 monument, and that is from the island archipelago. So it's everything northwest of the main Hawaiian Islands, all of these islands and atolls, all the way up the archipelago. The Bush Monument extended 50 miles out from each one of those islands and atolls, so effectively 100 miles across. And then in 2016, President Obama expanded Papahanaumokuakea to the full extent of the U.S. exclusive economic zone. So he took it out to 200 miles from each side of each island and atoll. So effectively 400 miles across, more than 400 miles across. It is the largest conservation area under the U.S. flag, consisting of approximately 582,000 square miles, twice the size of Texas. And its complexity and governance structure matches its expanse and complexity in ecosystems. So figuring out how do we co-manage was not an easy thing, and we're still learning 20 years later. But back then, it was really hard. We were writing the manual while we were flying the plane. Barry was the manager at Midway Atoll at that time, actually, even before Papahanaumokuakea was created, and he helped to plan for its management. Barry, you want to take a few minutes to explain those early days?
Sure, Susan. Thank you very much. I arrived on Midway in March of 2005 as the manager of Midway National Wildlife Refuge and the Battle of Midway National Memorial. I assume many of you, if not all, have heard of the World War II Battle of Midway. There are still some buildings and other memorials on the island that are part of the monument or the memorial. Well, the first year, like any year, your first year on a refuge was a lot of learning. Midway is very complex. It has demands, logistical demands that being 1,200 miles from the local grocery store, most refuges don't have. You also have people that live on the refuge 24 hours a day, every day of the year. So it's very different. So it was a lot to learn. So I was doing that in the first year and having a great time. And then one morning in June of 2006, I received a call from my supervisor who said, "Well, congratulations, you are now part of a Marine National Monument." And I went, "What? What are you talking about?" Well, it turned out that before then, no one knew anything about it. But the Council for Environmental Quality, which is a branch of the White House, the executive branch, created the monument to basically at the request of President Bush. And they decided that, as Susan explained, that it wouldn't just be the Fish and Wildlife Service, it would be co-managed. So I was to work with NOAA, a couple of different divisions, and Hawaii DLNR. And all of a sudden, I wasn't just the manager of Midway. Other people were too, which is kind of hard to take. It's just very kind of a very abrupt change. And transition was very, very slow. In the only real change that occurred in the first few months was that we were told we had to stop our recreational fishing activities because the proclamation of the monument prohibited all fishing, commercial and recreational. So we kept going. And if you earlier, Susan mentioned that the concept behind cooperative management was that we are better and stronger together. Well, that wasn't really the case in my experience. It was a very, very difficult time period where each agency basically came from a different starting point, and they all had differing underlying authorities, guidelines, and culture. We didn't even do NEPA in the same way. So it was very hard. And as a manager, it was difficult to concede management to others who did not know or understand the core principles of the National Wildlife Refuge System. But we, through a variety of meetings, we kept moving forward. And it was often that I was glad that I was 1,200 miles from Honolulu as Susan struggled and sometimes fought her way through endless meetings on how to make this monument work. But slowly we did. It was hard, but time passed and we started cooperatively working towards development of the monument management plan, which would be kind of our refuge CCP was integrated into the monument management plan. And that was we had a whole bunch of public meetings in 2008, and the document was produced at that time. And then shortly after that, I left. Now, I have been back to Midway several times to help with Battle of Midway memorial dates, different activities to commemorate the battle. And I've also stayed in touch as a member of FOMA, Friends of Midway, so I keep current on what's going on out there. And I'm really pleased to say that over the period of time since I was there, things have changed a great deal. It has really improved. And I think their goal of being stronger and better together, you can say it has been reached. It is working. It doesn't mean it's perfect. I think it will always be hard, but that doesn't mean we're not succeeding and we're not moving forward. And I think it's a very, very good example of how cooperative management can be done. Thank you.
Thanks, Barry. Yeah, and I'll just second that. We have learned so much as the partners and the management agencies and all of our stakeholders in the last 20 years. The MMB meets regularly. There is a real cooperative coordination and co-management structure that is succeeding now. It's very successful. I mean, as Barry said, like nothing's perfect, but it really is a model around the world on how multiple entities can move forward in in a common purpose and a common goal. So but we learned a lot in those 20 years, and even in those very, very early years, we learned a lot about management, co-management, and how do we do this. I'll just add a little bit. The Fish and Wildlife Service currently has offices in, as Barry said, we have people stationed at Midway, but the main office is in Honolulu. But in that learning, let's move forward. In those early years, in that learning, President Bush looked around and he said, "This is a great idea. This monument thing. Let's do more." And and he created the 3 other marine national monuments then in 2009. And so we'll start with Rose Atoll, and because of those early years in Papahanaumokuakea, management evolved, the administrations evolved. We understood what can work and what doesn't, and how do we improve efficiency and minimize complexity. So in Rose Atoll, we have an intergovernmental committee between the Fish and Wildlife Service, NOAA Fisheries and Sanctuaries, and the American Samoa government. And we coordinate management and care for the monument through really capitalizing on each of our agencies' unique interests and jurisdictions. Today, the entire national monument, so Bush created the monument from the islands on the atoll, all of the islands out 50 nautical miles. The entire area is managed as a unit of the National Wildlife Refuge System in full authority under the Refuge Administration Act. We have office in Tutuila, co-located with the National Park Service, but that office is currently unstaffed, and so it's currently managed out of our Honolulu office. And then somewhat similar, the Mariana Trench Monument, also established in 2009 by President Bush, is managed cooperatively between the Fish and Wildlife Service, NOAA Fisheries, and the government of the Commonwealth of the Northern Mariana Islands. There are 3 units that make up the Mariana Trench Monument. There's the Trench Unit, which is the largest. There's 18 undersea mud volcanoes, which are unbelievably otherworldly places that I could do a whole day's worth of conversation about, but I won't get into them. And then there's the Islands Unit, which is this blue area that includes the islands and the waters and the submerged lands, and all of these areas of the Mariana Trench Monument are now also managed as units of the National Wildlife Refuge System. We receive advice and recommendations from the Mariana Trench Advisory Council, which is a council made up of representatives from the CNMI, from the U.S. Coast Guard, and the Department of Defense. We have a wonderful visitor contact station and a team stationed there with a superintendent and a visitor services ranger that are just amazing folks working with the communities and the government of the CNMI and Guam for the protection of this monument. And last but not least, the Pacific Islands Heritage Marine National Monument. It's currently over 490,000 square miles, about 3 times the size of California, if you will. President Bush established the Pacific Islands Heritage in 2009, and the original Bush Monument was around each one of these 7 islands and atolls 50 miles out. You see a pattern here. Each one of the bush monuments areas went out 50 miles from the core of those islands. So Palmyra and Kingman are very close together, and they were joined into this one unit, so 50 miles out. Howland Baker likewise. And then in 2014, President Barack Obama expanded the units at Wake Atoll, at Johnston Atoll, and Jarvis Island. So these extend now to the full extent of the U.S. exclusive economic zone, again, 400 miles out on either side of the islands. And then later, after extensive community involvement, it was interesting and really eye-opening. The Pacific Island community started talking with us, and there he said, "Oh, sorry, President Bush named this monument the Pacific Remote Islands Monument." And the Pacific Islanders were saying to us, Pacific Remote Islands is really a misnomer because, maybe for you in Washington, D.C., it's remote, but for us, it's right in our backyard. This is throughout the Central Pacific. And so why are you giving it this Washington-centric nomenclature? And so President Biden enlisted just the help of so many people and the agencies to engage the community to recommend a new name for Pacific Remote Islands Monument. And in the end of his administration, he named it the Pacific Island Heritage Monument. And this monument is also, the entire area is managed as units of the National Wildlife Refuge System, implementing the Refuge Administration Act. We have staff at Palmyra, co-located with the Nature Conservancy, and it's managed out of our Honolulu office. It is cooperatively managed between the Fish and Wildlife Service and NOAA Fisheries. And as I mentioned, the Nature Conservancy is on Palmyra. They're a private landowner, and they operate a preserve and research station at Palmyra. The Air Force has the administrative jurisdiction and control of Johnston Atoll, of the uplands of Johnston Atoll and Wake Atoll, and they actually have an active military installation at Wake. So we coordinate with them on the wildlife conservation for these two atolls. You may have heard that this monument was open to commercial fishing earlier in 2025 by an executive order. It was open for U.S. flag vessels in April, but a subsequent court case and court order then closed it again until a public engagement rulemaking process is conducted by the National Marine Fisheries Service. So marine monuments are literally living laboratories. Every time scientists go down and go into them, they're finding new things all the time. Species richness and endemism rival the Galapagos. Papahanaumokuakea alone has more than 7,000 marine species. Roughly 25% of those are found only in Hawaii. The longest lived marine species ever recorded, this black coral, over 4,500 years old, is found in the monuments. They found new species of butterfly fish, new species of octopus. This snailfish, the deepest fish ever recorded, filmed 5 miles down, was found in the monuments. And it's not just about species and finding new species and what things inhabit our planet, but some areas still haven't even been fully mapped. They're finding new features. We're finding new seamounts and learning about how migrating species use these undersea mountains as stepping stones as they migrate across the Pacific. These places are also our living history of the planet, really. Science is not only identifying new species, it's rewriting what we know about ecosystems in the oceans. Long-term ecological research at Palmyra shows that an intact ocean, roughly 85% of the total fish biomass is in top predators. Top predators like tuna and sharks and jacks, groupers, and of course, seabirds. And when we compare that to the coral reefs that we see, that are by human population centers, most of the reefs that we know of that are fished, those reefs have closer to 10% or less of their biomass in the top predators. So what does that really mean? It means that in a healthy ocean, the predators are supposed to outweigh the prey. Now, imagine if that were true in a healthy system on land 200 years ago. Just think about that. More biomass in bears than in bison. More biomass in wolves than in elk and deer. It's crazy, right? Like, it's really even hard to fathom for me, but these far-flung units of the National Wildlife Refuge System are teaching the world about how the ocean is supposed to be. In the ocean, these top predators, the sharks, the seabirds, the tuna, should dominate the seas. And we see this on islands too. The monuments provide nesting and feeding grounds for more than 28 million seabirds of 23 species. Now, seabirds can spend 97% of their lives at sea, but they require these predator-free islands to safely nest. And we know it's not enough to protect nesting habitat. Species need roaming and foraging habitat too. They need all of those productive habitats across the whole Pacific. It's crazy. A Laysan albatross at Wake Island can go forage up off of Alaska and make it back home to feed their chick in the same day. We see this more clearly now because of technology, and we can use technology to track the distribution of species and see how they are traversing this massive Pacific Ocean. I love this map. It's a little weird, but it shows the Pacific. And remember, the Pacific Ocean is the largest feature on Earth. It covers more than all of the land mass combined. It covers 1/3 of our entire planet. And technology now is showing us how life actually uses this vast space. The map traces just a handful of Pacific species, things like whales and sharks, seabirds, turtles, seals, and tuna. To me, it looks like a bowl of spaghetti, but it's really entire lives unfolding across this huge ocean basin. These animals need vast areas to feed, to rest, to reproduce. And just as on land, we know you can't manage species with bag limits and gear restrictions like hunting and fishing. You can't use those alone. Wild things need wild places suitable for their lifestyles to survive. And that's where the marine national monuments really make a difference. Because in a changing ocean, these monuments are refuges that don't just protect species and habitats. Those are really important things to do, but they help us as humans too, because they protect the ecological memory of what the oceans are and what they should be. The monuments give humans a better understanding of the world and provide a real target for us to aim for in sustaining the biological integrity and environmental health of the planet. So, okay, where are we? Wow, Barry, we did good. We're under 30 minutes right now. Time check. We're going to just give a few examples of how our monument teams have helped to restore more natural systems, because here's the beauty of it all. Given a chance, nature has an amazing ability to restore itself. And we know that giving them intact ecosystems gives them an even better ability. So we're going to just provide 3 wonderful examples of work in the monuments. And Barry's going to start off in Papahanaumokuakea back up at Midway. Go for it, Barry.
Thank you, Susan. Well, Midway is home to the largest albatross colony in the world. The birds you see on the screen there are primarily Laysan albatross. The brown ones are all the chicks, well along in development. The black and white are the adults. And this is it's quite the scene. Everywhere you go on Midway looks just like this, whether it's on Sand Island or on Eastern Island. But it hasn't always looked just like that. When when the service took over full management of Midway in 1998, there was an invasive plant spread throughout the islands. This yellow plant that you see here is golden crown beard or Verbicina eclinoides. And it was probably originally brought to Midway as an ornamental. I think we're not really sure when it was first brought there, but could have been anywhere from the 40s up to the 60s. And it's a native plant from the American Southwest, grows as a pretty little wildflower along the roads. But when you put it in an environment where it has a year-round growing climate, plenty of rainfall, and lots of fertilizer from all the birds, that small roadside plant can grow up to be 5 or 6 feet tall. And as you see on the main part of the picture, quite dense. The problem was its growth throughout the year varies. So when the birds arrive to begin nesting in the fall, the plant is very small. It's nice and low, looks like nice little ground cover, and they will establish their nests. And they'll, over the season, as the chick matures, the plants continue to grow and grow. And then what happens as the plants reach this full mature stage, the adults have a hard time finding the chicks to feed them. The chicks get trapped in the plants. Untold hundreds or even thousands of chicks were dying in these beds of Verbicina. So even back as far as 1997, efforts were underway to control the Verbicina or golden crownbeard. And they started by pulling. We were still doing that in 2005 when I got there. Volunteers would do it. When we had visitor programs, visitors would help. Staff would do it. We'd have 2-hour blocks of everybody would go out and pull Verbicina. The idea being that you pull the plants at maturity to prevent the seeds from dropping, and the goal was minimize the seed bed, seed bank. But it really, despite our many efforts, it worked only in very small areas, like a nesting study plot where you could go in and in one little area kind of control it. But on the big scale, it didn't work. So eventually, we realized we were going to have to do another method, and spraying chemicals is what we came up with. And in 2011, Friends of Midway received a $400,000 NIFWIF, National Fish and Wildlife Foundation grant, to help support developing a structured spraying program through hiring contractors on the island to have a dedicated team go out each and every day in an organized manner and start controlling those plants. And subsequently, a few years later, they also received one of the very first invasive species control grants from Fish and Wildlife Service of $1 million. And that effort has really borne fruit. It's not quick. It's taken many years for it to move forward. But now that field, now look in the middle of this field, you can see a tree kind of right there. Susan's pointing it out. Now go to the next slide, Susan, and you'll see that same tree is right there at the intersection of what look like roads, but are in fact remnants of the World War II runways for the Navy airport. But the Verbicina is gone. The main efforts now, we still are trying to maintain, go out and search for Verbicina, control what you can find, but they have to search hard to find any plant at this point. And our efforts are really going into helping even make our long-term program we've had to outplant native species, Eragrostis and others, to bring back the native habitat. In this area, looks like it really hasn't been quite done yet, but it's still a big improvement from having those chicks buried in that forest of Verbicina. So the system is going forward. FOMA has been helping tremendously. Just recently, funding cuts for Fish and Wildlife Service. They lost the funding for their volunteer coordinator, which oversaw the volunteers who were doing all the habitat restoration work. And FOMA has stepped up and funded that position for this year. So the efforts continue. We have to keep going forward, but this is a tremendous success story, and I think we should be very proud of what's been done over there over the years. Thank you.
Thanks, Barry. And what did you say earlier? We were talking, and you said this year they found 3 verbicida plants or something. Systematic monitoring of the entire island. They found 3.
3
And
plants.
they got them before they seeded, right? Because if
Yes,
those
they
3
were
were to
still very
seed,
small.
then they
Yes.
could take over the whole island again.
Yeah, if we
Really
can't
important
complete
work.
that seed back 100%, it will come back. I mean, it would take a while, but it would come back.
Right.
So that's a tremendous success story, and they're going to keep looking, and they're going to keep, keeping it in control. But right now, when I went back to Midway in 2015, I was out there to assist at the request of Fish and Wildlife Service. I couldn't believe the difference. It was just amazing, the difference from when I was there. It just
Right.
so heartwarming to see the changes.
Yeah. Record numbers of birds. Wonderful, wonderful work. Okay. Now, next, we're going to jump down to Johnston Atoll again. Johnston is an interesting place with a very colorful history. And here again, like we could do an entire day talking about Johnston. The military used it for decades, but then pulled out in 2005 and closed the base down entirely. With no more human disturbance, no more people on Johnston, the wildlife and seabird populations rebounded quickly. And in late 2009, refuge scientists got out on island, as we try to do whenever possible, and they got out there with the help from one of the NOAA vessels that was going. And they got on island and did a rapid ecological assessment and found a really nasty invasive species, the yellow crazy ant. Scientists and managers then, after we've found out that we have the yellow crazy ant there, we went about putting together an emergency mobilization team to find the extent of this infestation of the yellow crazy ant and to eradicate it. So we started that in 2010. And it was critical because since the military left, the wildlife had really come rushing back to Johnston. Many, many of them ground nesters, tens of thousands of seabirds, 15 different species of seabirds returned. And now, in fact, it's the world's largest red-tailed tropic bird nesting colony in the world. And so this was great for wildlife. New Island opened up for seabirds, but we knew the yellow crazy ant was really bad because it sprays out formic acid, and that formic acid can damage, destroy, even melt soft tissues around the eyes and the skin and the feet. It causes severe injuries, even up to death. So we sent out the team to Johnston. It is an uninhabited island. It takes 3.5 days to get there by an ocean-going vessel. We sent out the teams in 2010, a four-person team, and we switched out that team every 6 months to find and kill the yellow crazy ant. We called them the Crazy Ant Strike Team, or CAST. And over a 10-year period, nearly 100 staff and volunteers on 20 separate CAST crews devoted more than 130,000 field hours monitoring and getting rid of these pests. It was an enormous undertaking. And after 2017, the CAST crews stopped finding the yellow crazy ant, and they continued to monitor it methodically and wasn't finding any and weren't finding any. And so we wondered, like, was this the end? Did we get them all? And then stop and think about that. Like, how do you kill the last ant in your backyard? How do you find it? How do you even know it exists? Because yellow crazy ants are subterranean, so they're making nests underground. The challenge, it was enormous. And And the teams are out there monitoring. Are they still there? It would be awful if we missed them and we left. And a few years later, we came back and they had reemerged and reinfested the island. So after years of persistent monitoring, the monument managers brought new team members to Johnston. In December of 2020, we enlisted the help of conservation detector dogs. Solo and Guinness and their trainers had trained for about a year, using their strong noses to find the scent of yellow crazy ant. So they made the 3.5 day boat journey to Johnston, and they spent 14 days surveying more than 110 miles around the island looking for yellow crazy ant. And they didn't find any, which was really wonderful. And so the Pacific Islands Heritage Managers were overjoyed to announce the full eradication of yellow crazy ant at Johnston in 2021. Really an enormous success story. Now, a quick jump further south down to Palmyra Atoll, also in the Pacific Islands Heritage Monument. Palmyra is 1,000 miles south of Honolulu. And go. In 1991, there was a Taiwanese longline fishing vessel that wrecked on Palmyra's reefs. It eventually settled in about 30 feet of water, and there it sat for many years. And remember, the refuge was established 10 years later in 2001. So our scientists were reviewing, monitoring, surveying everything. In 2007, Fish and Wildlife Service and U.S. Geological Survey biologists began documenting the explosive growth of this organism around the wreck. This is called the corallomorph. And the corallomorph is these small disc, kind of anemone type creatures. They began reproducing rapidly, forming a blanket around the wreck, extending out more than 1 kilometer all the way around this wreck. Scientists believe that it was the iron leaching off of the wreck that was fueling or feeding this explosive growth of the corallomorph. The corallomorph is a native species, as far as we knew. It was found other places on the island, but certainly not in these densities. And it was smothering one of these, the nearly pristine reefs of Palmyra, with this just forward advancement growing further and further out from the wreck. So just like we know, treating invasive species on land is the same in the water too, right? You first remove the source of the infestation, and then you can treat and then try and replant native species. And so that's what we set about doing with wonderful support from our region and headquarters offices. In 2013, Fish and Wildlife Service undertook an unbelievably complex and ambitious project to remove this wreck from Palmyra's reef, as well as another smaller wreck at Palmyra, and a third one that was at Kingman Reef, just 20 miles away. We enlisted the expert services of commercial divers and a salvage crew. And remember, this is 1,000 miles south of Honolulu, so it's difficult to get people there, and you have to bring everything because there's no Home Depot to go and buy extra supplies if you run out of something. This picture, I love it. It shows the work platform. They worked off of this jack-up barge, and this is the wreck after it's been about a third of it has already been disassembled. This is the engine room, which was a particularly difficult place. The pieces were cut underwater, and they were cut with underwater torches, underwater chainsaws, underwater jackhammers by the commercial divers. And then the crane on the jack-up barge lifted these pieces out of the water and put them onto these scows. These scows were specially constructed shallow water vessels to get these really heavy transport pieces through the shallow water that was surrounding the wreck. And some places the water, the coral bodies came up out of the water. In other places, the water was only 5 feet deep. And so they really had to transit. We established a special, the deepest water transit path that these scows could get through to get them out into the deep water channel. And then they would transfer to the materials barge. There was a 160-ton crane that lifted everything up and put it all onto this materials barge where it was secured and eventually transported back to Long Beach and recycled. It was dangerous work. It was hard work. And the project was originally planned for 6 weeks, but due to the complexity and the challenges of the environment and the condition of the wrecks, the whole project was extended to about 2.5 months. But it worked. That's the beauty of it. It worked. The crew was unbelievable, and they met the challenges and removed the ships without creating any additional impacts to the reef. And that was one of our founding requirements, mandates, that we were not going to create any additional impacts to the reef. All told, we removed nearly 1 million pounds of shipwreck from these coral reefs. It was an extraordinary conservation action to remove these 1 million pounds and protect some of the most pristine coral reefs in the world. Removing these shipwrecks was the first phase of the coral restoration work. With the shipwrecks gone, the otherwise healthy reefs had the opportunity to recover. Scientists began treating the invasive species, tracking those treatments on what was best to eliminate the corallomorph. And then they also began reattaching coral colonies to the damaged areas, because we know returning a more natural ecosystem gives these coral communities the best chance of recovery, especially in the changing climate of our world. And that's what it's all about. That's the National Wildlife Refuge System, and it was built, right? We know the refuge system was built in part to conserve and sustain landscapes and species of the United States before they're lost, before they slip away from our collective memory. And the Fish and Wildlife Service's job in these monuments furthers this original refuge mission, because it's not just about protecting what's left. It's also remembering what the abundance of the world is, what it once was, and what it can be. These monuments inspire and they challenge all of us to have the courage to aim higher and to dive deeper and to restore and conserve in order to pass on this healthy world to future generations. If we want resilient landscapes and living oceans, we have to protect places that still remember how they work. And those places can help reset our expectations. So thank you very much for your time and attention. And I'm going to jump really quickly in our Q&A. If you haven't already, you too can go to the monuments. Right now you can go to Midway Atoll. Thanks to the Friends of Midway. You can log on and watch Midway live. They have a live critter cam, or you can go on Google Earth and take your little dude and go do the street view, and you can go diving in Palmyra. You can go dive at Rose Atoll. You can go walk around Midway and walk around Laysan Island. Wonderful technological advances that gives us everybody the opportunity to experience these wonderful places. And so as we go through Q&As, I'm just going to bring up Midway, because why not? Although we don't have the sound, you won't have the sound, but here's Midway live. Thanks for your time and attention.
Thank you, Susan and Barry, very much. We do have some questions in the chat, so I'll let you decide who to field any of the questions. The first one is, can you highlight the difference between marine refuges and NOAA reserves?
Yeah, without getting too bureaucratic, it's NOAA has reserves and national marine sanctuaries in their kind of protected area, place-based protected area arsenal. And they're run by different, or they're authorized by different laws, essentially. And so national marine sanctuaries are, yeah, I don't want to get too bureaucratic on this. They're run by the National Marine Sanctuaries Act, and then there's an ecosystem reserve over Papahanaumokuakea. The United States has a number of different place-based management tools to look after whatever is, the object of interest, whether it's, the wildlife or the history, just like national parks and national wildlife refuges uh, provide different scales or levels or mandates of conservation. So too NOAA has these tools to protect them. And so there's the beauty of the National Wildlife Refuge System, in my mind, is that it's that wildlife first mission. Uh, Oftentimes, the NOAA sanctuaries have a dual. Like national parks, they'll have a dual mandate of conservation, but also opening and public recreation. NOAA sanctuaries oftentimes have a multiple use mandate, and so I'm going to stop there because I could go down a whole rabbit trail on some of the differences.
Okay, thank you, Susan. The next question is, has the administration stripped protection for these reserves?
As was mentioned, there was a presidential action to open the Pacific Islands Heritage Monument to fishing 50 miles outside of 50 miles. So in those areas, Jarvis, Johnston, and Wake, from 50 to 200 miles. The president directed those to be open to commercial fishing for U.S. flag vessels. That went to court, and the court ordered that the National Marine Fisheries Service, who is responsible for all of the fisheries management in the monuments, with the exception of the original refuge areas, that they go through a public process to propose opening those in a rulemaking process. Now, similarly, they just opened the Northeast Canyons and Seamounts Monument to commercial fishing. I don't know, but I anticipate that conservation advocates might take that to court also. There's been no other actions currently to open any of the monuments to activities that were previously prohibited. There's a lot of activity right now in the Pacific by the Bureau of Ocean Energy Management looking at deep sea mining and mapping the Pacific U.S. areas to open it up to mining. They have not proposed doing that in the monuments, but outside of all the monument areas currently.
Thank you, Susan. Who enforces the large vessel or commercial fishing exclusion in the sanctuaries, and is compliance a problem?
Yeah, you can imagine, right? They're out in the middle of the Pacific Ocean, and so you can't just see somebody fishing, but there's wonderful tools and wonderful community involvement. The U.S. Coast Guard is the primary law enforcement agency for fisheries enforcement, along with the NOAA fisheries. Like the NOAA fisheries is the law enforcement, but the U.S. Coast Guard, they've got the tools, they've got the, excuse me, the planes and the ships to go out and interdict anybody. And remember, every fishing boat that goes out has to come back to land somewhere. And so we have agreements with nations all around the Pacific that if a fishing vessel is identified to be illegally fishing in one of these monument areas or in the refuge, our partnerships through the Coast Guard and the other nations, when the ship comes back, then they can be boarded and the interdiction if we're not getting them out on site. Law enforcement has amazing tools with satellite technology. There's also a great crowdsourcing thing. Let me find this. Do I have this? I'm going to share this image. It's an old image, but it really demonstrates, I think, some of the. No, wait, I lost it. Sorry. Anyhow, here, I'll make this big. Each one of these white dots is a light of a fishing vessel.
Then we're not seeing your screen yet.
You're not seeing it. Okay, I need to share my screen again. And here you can see Hawaii and the exclusive economic zone. So there's fishing vessels all around here.
Still
And
not
then,
seeing it.
oh, thank you.
There.
There we go. Maybe a
There we
little
go.
better.
Yep.
So here's Hawaii. And you see all of these white dots and the fishing vessels around. Here's Johnston fishing boats, the Palmyra Kingman unit, the Howland and Baker. Wow, just the fishing around those areas. The blue is the U.S. territory where those international boats are not allowed. And so there's a site, I don't remember what it's called, fishing. I'm sorry, I don't remember what it's called. Where people go online and they watch the boats and they can detect. They even use AI for the activities of the behavior of the boats and how boats are moving around, and you can identify whether it's a fishing activity and whether that fishing activity is going on in one of the monument areas, and then they can be again interdicted when they get back to a land base. So there's a lot of tools. Does that mean that we're getting them all? No. We know that there's illegal fishing going on, but there's really creative tools. There's also a tool where they're looking at night, the lights at night through satellite imagery. Right, every boat that's out there is supposed to have a vessel monitoring system that's always being pinged by satellite, so you can track boats with their VMS. But they're, unscrupulous people will turn off their VMS and then go fishing in a no fishing area and then come back out. Well, at nighttime, if they're fishing, they're probably going to have their lights on, and so now satellites are tracking the lights at night, even if the VMSs are off. And so law enforcement entities are able to see illegal activity that way.
That's great that technology is helping out. Scott says he loves the map of the species movement across the ocean. Is that available with a legend someplace?
Yes, it was a publication. I can find and send that the publication, the scientists that wrote all that up. It's a great compilation of lots of data sets.
There was a question about whether the presentation would be available later. Yes, it will be recorded and you'll get a link to the recording, and it will also be in the Corfa Resource Center, so it will be available for later. Annis asks that we remind people about volunteer coordinators are gone everywhere in our refuge system. Activism is required to get such current firings reversed. No coordinators, no volunteers. Please repeat this from the last webinar. Lots of positive comments about how wonderful the presentation is. I'm looking to see if there are more questions. Lots of greetings for you and Barry, so you'll want to check the chat when you have a chance. Are there lawsuits in consideration for the Atlantic Coast Monument since it has recently been opened for commercial fishing?
I'm not aware of them, but I know we have a lot of friends out there, so I hope so. Personally, my opinion.
I would assume so soon.
Yeah.
Desiree said advocacy matters because of friends groups advocating for funding for the entire refuge system. It helped fund the projects like the shipwreck removal and invasive eradication in the monuments. Your voice matters even if you are a half world away. And that's the end of the questions in the chat. Tom, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Yeah, thanks. Wonderful presentation. Thank you both, Susan and Barry. And Barry, there's not enough time for you to tell the story of you and the First Lady in your pajamas and a smoke alarm. So maybe that'll be another webinar just devoted to Barry's.
Let's hope we don't go there, Tom. Thank you, though.
But it did bring to mind one question I had. You know, George Bush was so important in this development of these national marine monuments, and I'm wondering why. And then I thought, well, maybe it was his dad was a naval pilot in the Pacific. But do you have any insight about why this was such an important place for him?
There's a great story. NOAA had gone through a 5-year process as directed by President Clinton to create a national marine sanctuary in the Northwest Hawaiian Islands. So they planned and planned and planned for 5 years, made this management plan, and they took it to George Bush. Well, about that time, Jean-Michel Cousteau had made a movie called Voyage to Cure, which is a great movie. Wayne, I think, probably was a part of that or knows about it. And in the Voyage to Cure, he stops at all of the islands and talks about just the phenomenal resources of the Northwest Hawaiian Islands. And Sylvia Earle, who is a ocean explorer, and Jean-Michel Cousteau, as the story goes, went to the White House and they played the movie for George Bush and Mrs. Bush, and Mrs. Bush said to George, "You got to do something up there." Kind of elbowed him. You got to make sure this is taken care of. And so when NOAA went with their plan for a national marine sanctuary, he said, "What else can we do?" Well, because this has to go to Congress and then it'll be more bureaucracy and it could take more time. And his advisors said, "Well, you can use the Antiquities Act and make it a monument." He said, "Okay, let's do it." And as Barry said, nobody was expecting it in the agencies. Dinah was there. Dinah wrote the proclamation. Thank you very much, Dinah. Good job. And she could probably go into a whole lot better story of what that is. But that's the story that we heard out here. It was thanks to that movie and Mrs. Bush that really inspired and prodded him to do so.
Wonderful. All right. A couple of quick notes before we let everyone go. Our next webinar next month will be on dark sky programs. You'll learn how the importance of dark skies as a natural resource and how refuges can help further the goals of the dark sky program. That'll be an interesting one. And then we have our share call February 25th at 4 p.m. Eastern Time for friends who want to know the ins and outs of gift and donor management systems. And then will also be a regular open chat for anyone who wants to talk about things in general. With that, thank you both for spending the afternoon with us, and thank you all for spending this nice winter day somewhere where it's warm and colorful.
Can I
Take
say
care,
one more
everyone.
thing?
Sure.
Could I just one more thing very quickly, and it was alluded a little bit. But absolutely, there's friends groups for these refuges. They're out in the middle of the Pacific, but they are so important. And so if you're interested in becoming, members of the friends groups or supporting them, or even continuing to mention and advocate for them in the everything that we do for the refuge system, it all helps, right? We're all in this together, and I'm so proud to see so many friends from Detroit River here too. Thank you so much.
Very good. Take care,
Thanks,
everybody.
guys.
Thank you.